What's going on, everybody? It's Connor from the Semester Channel here, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different from the typical hipster longsword today. We're going to be talking about who, what, where, when, and why Vadi. Okay. Due to the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing activism that has followed his death in Minneapolis, I have been heavily involved in protests and activism as of late, and that has kind of gotten in the way of a lot of the things that I typically do. So, yeah, that's where I've been for the past week. Apologies if that has gotten in the way of you enjoying my videos. But in the time that has happened, we've had an increase in a lot of great things here at the Semester Channel. First and foremost, we've had a great increase in production quality. We got a fucking ring light, bro. We got a fucking ring light, bro. So we're gonna be covering a good variety of topics today. Like I said, who, what, where, when, Vadi, and it's gonna be a whole lot of fun. So let's dive right into it. Okay, so who was Filippo de Vadi? This is probably one of the most difficult questions for us to answer, just due to the fact that we don't have a lot of archival understanding of where he was, what he was doing. And, yeah. Some of these theories and hypotheses that I will be stating have been argued about for a very long time, much longer than I have been involved in the HEMA community. A lot of the things that I'm going to be saying here, you can kind of just imagine the preface of hypothesized or assumed or inferred, although there is little factual evidence of where Vadi was and what he was doing up until he wrote his text. There are two kind of competing theories onto who Vadi was, and I will go into them a little bit during this video. Okay, so here's what we know. Filippo de Vadi was a 15th century fencing master from Pisa. His name, Filippo de Vadi, is only a small portion of his name. His full name is Filippo de Vadi Pisano. So we know that he is from the northern city of Pisa in Italy. There's two possible Vadis, okay? Both of them have the ability to be at the right place in the right time for them to write the book and have access to the Flower of Battle, which shows up a lot in the later sections of Filippo de Vadi's text. So we're going to spell it out really clearly. So who was Vadi? There was two possible Vadis. There was Governor Vadi, which I'll call Governor Vadi, and there was Dr. Vadi, who I will call Dr. Vadi. Dr. Vadi. Dun dun dun.
Dr. Vadi.
Dr. Vadi.
Governor Vadi versus Dr. Vadi.
Fight. Governor Vadi was the governor of Reggio under ilnqA, and then subsequently the counselor or possible advisor of Duke Borzo d'Este of the Duchy of Ferrara, which included Modena, Reggio, and Ferrara, from about 1452 to 1470. Okay, during this period, in 1457 specifically, this Governor Vadi had a coin coined for him by Giovanni Boldo, which has a picture of this man, of this specific Vadi, which looks a lot like our Vadi in the De Arte Gladiatoria dei Mercanti, and it shows on its backside an image that's very similar to the Segno shown here that we see inside of De Arte Gladiatoria dei Mercanti. So this Vadi is in the right place to have access to the two copies of the Flower of Battle that the d'Este family had. Okay. The right age is a little bit weird because he would probably be a lot older, but that would make sense if he is to, after this period of being a governor, travel to Urbino looking for employment as a fencing master later on in life, as a lot of fencing masters during that time period did. A lot of people like Fiore himself wrote his text later on in life, after he'd done things, and just been a general badass across the northern parts of Italy. But that, the age I think we would put him around like 70 or 80 during his time period of him writing this, maybe 60 if I recall correctly. He would be old as shit, so it wouldn't necessarily line up with the depictions of himself unless he was depicting himself as a younger man in the Arte Gladiatoria dei Mercanti. So,
Dr. Vadi.
Dr. Vadi. Dr. Vadi was another Filippo de Vadi who was a doctor for a condottieri band, or a mercenary company in the northern parts of Italy, who studied at the University of Ferrara. This would place him as having good access to the d'Este family library, where he would have been able to look at the 2 copies of the Flower of Battle that Fiore wrote for the d'Este family back in his day. Remember that Vadi, at least in time period, is later to Fiore than Fiore, right? So the time period of Fiore to Vadi is about a difference of 80 years, around about. I think it was one of the copies of the Flower of Battle was dated to 1408, around about, and Vadi wrote his text in about 1480 to 1482 or somewhere around there. So it's a big jump in time. Dr. Vadi, in terms of the writing style, how he speaks about himself, and the depictions of himself inside of this text, more aligned with that of a younger man, which would also explain why he went from working in a mercenary band to trying to settle himself in the ducal court of Urbino after whatever period of time, right? So he goes, he studies, he finds these books, he writes his text, and he tries to give it to the Duke of Urbino as a whose name was Guidobaldo de Monteferto. I just love saying Italian.
Say it again.
Guidobaldo de Monteferto. To try to seat himself as a fencing master in one of the most renowned courts of the time period. Urbino, during this specific period, was in the middle of a renaissance, a center for the arts, for fencing masters, and for many to come and to kind of live in this specific area. So, who do I think was the correct Vadi out of these 2 Vadis? Personally, I lean more towards the idea that the Vadi who was the governor of Reggio was probably the correct Vadi. Just the coin itself kind of puts it over for me. I know that the age would be a little bit later for the specific master, but just from what we know of fencing masters during the time period, they wrote a lot of their texts later on in life, so it's not necessarily against the norm. Maybe I'm too focused on this coin, but the coin really puts it over for me. I can easily see why this Dr. Vadi, who operates in the exact same time period, really fucking throws this shit through a loop on us identifying who exactly he is. But I can also see a really easy and good argument for the Dr. Vadi to be the correct Vadi, as he would have less of a noble stature, and he would probably be trying to find himself a little bit better of a position with higher status. We won't really necessarily know which is the correct Vadi until we find more archival evidence and possibly get that sacred manuscript that is somewhere locked in the depths of the Vatican archives. But my money is on the Governor Vadi, other than the Dr. Vadi. Holy shit, that was a lot. Okay, so that kind of covers who was Vadi and where was Vadi all in one nice thing. But we have a couple more questions to answer, and what was Vadi's text, right? So we have to talk about Fiore to get a better understanding of where we get Vadi and what Vadi's text means. There's a lot of comparisons that can be drawn between Fiore's text and Vadi's text, although Vadi is himself very, very individual, at least in terms of his straying from Fiore's material. The timeline of Armazzare is pretty self-contained, all spanning the regions of northern Italy with some dips into Germanic areas, starting in the early 1400s. Fiore de Liberi himself, we have a date for roughly 1340 to, I think it was 1420, somewhere around there, for his birth and his death. Fiore wrote his text later in life, after he'd gotten done just being a straight badass, traveling around many places and learning from many masters, as he says so himself. Fiore writes very little on his own career as a commander and a master of arms, but as I said, Fiore lays out his credentials for for his readers in other ways, stating that, as I said, that his master was this guy, Johann Suveno, and that his master before him was Nikolai Beethoven, who we don't know who they are. Just as an aside, most of the stuff that I'm talking about right now I'm almost pulling directly from the Wiktenauer website on Fiore de Liberi and Filippo de Vadi. I will put the sources to everything in the comment section down below. He also lists some people that he taught as well. A man by the name of Peter von Gruen, Niccolo von Erslingen, Galeazzo Gonzago di Mantova, Lancelotto Beccaria di Pavia, Giovanni de Baggio di Milano, and Aizone di Casalbarco. And he also highlights some of their martial exploits, which are some pretty dope stories that are introduced in the Flower Battle. I'm assuming that most people that are coming to these videos are either initiates into Fiore's tradition. If you haven't read the entirety of the text, please do so. It is your, in my opinion, responsibility as a student of these masters to read the entirety of their text and not just the sections that you're specifically studying. So, Fiore, we have a little bit of a better understanding of where he was and what he was doing during the time period. Like we have an account of him and the. Did you just try to? The executive producer is getting very upset with me that I don't know how to pronounce Aquila correctly. We have an account of Fiore acting as I think he was, here, checking my notes real quick. He was tasked by the High Council of a specific area with inspection of artillery pieces for the Aquilan War of Succession. He was also tasked with augmenting the forces of the city that he was assisting with the artillery pieces by hiring this condottieri band. He goes out there, picks them up, and takes them back, and it's done in, I think, under 3 months, if I recall the numbers correctly for Wiktenauer. So we have a lot better of an account of who Fiore was, what he was doing during the time period. I think there's also some, like, a little bit more dubious records of him showing up different places and fighting in duels. We also know for a fact that at the battle, or like the duel between Busaku, who was like a famous, I can't remember if it was the greater or the lesser Busaku, but one of the Busakus had a duel with Galeazzo di Mantova that Fiore was present for, and there is some really dope stuff written about that specifically, which if I can find the link for it, I'll leave it down in the description down below. If one of you guys can find it too and throw it up in the comments, that would be great. Which brings us to our next source. We'll go back to Fiore after we get done kind of establishing a timeline and figuring out what the specific differences between Fiore and our next source, Die Blume des Kampfes, as it is colloquially known, before we kind of compare and contrast everything. Die Blume des Kampfes is the specific group of texts that contain a lot of stuff that is very reminiscent of Fiore's art, and also has very small hints and peeks of other things that show up in Vadi's texts, specifically what Vadi would call poste de frontale shows up in Die Blume des Kampfes, as well as some similarities between some of the Polac's plays that are in Die Blume des Kampfes. Die Blume des Kampfes is not, how many times can I say Die Blume des Kampfes? Die Blume des Kampfes is not a singular source. It is a group of codices that resemble each other very, very closely. Some people who are really awesome and have done a lot of really hard fucking work who have been able to find all these beautiful pieces of art for us to study and to read, being mainly Michael Chimister, who is the founder of the Wiktenauer and puts out some serious fucking work for us as HEMA fencers. Himself, or the people that have found these texts, have read through them, and they have noticed just like a lot of similarities to plays that are from Fiore, and guards and other plays that are similar to Vadi, and they occupy this middle period of the arts art tradition. The earliest of the texts being Codex 5278, which is from the 1420s, The next latest being MSB.26, and the latest being Codex 10799. All of these sources have guards, plays, and different actions that are reminiscent to Fiore's spear plays, poleaxe plays, and spada due mani, sword in two hands, long sword plays. But they also contain a lot of other interesting stuff in them as well. There is a copy in one of them of Conrad Kaiser's infamous text, Bella Fortis, which has a bunch of really fun siege equipment stuff in there. And they also include things like sword butler, like single-handed sword plays. I think there's some dueling shield stuff in there. There's also a bunch of guys in really cute, goofy, like one-piece jumpsuits and stuff like that. And overall, it does kind of raise an interesting question of what the Liberi, or the Armanzarian tradition, did outside of Fiore's own work. We obviously do not have any records to show what or if there was any other masters who taught a similar style or in the same vein of a tradition as Fiore yet, but we always hope to uncover more whenever possible as fencers and as historiographers. I myself haven't done much in the ways of translation or transcription, but I wish to one day be able to gain those skills and help kind of add or give back to the collective, and not just be a sporty boy that fights people at tournaments. So that brings us to Vadi, right, who writes his texts in 1480, 1482 to 1487, I think is the rough date, before we kind of sprawl out into the Bolognese tradition. Okay? So that will bring us to what Vadi is. So although Vadi is a very clear departure from the traditions that have come from the masters that have come before him, how are we able to decide that Vadi is in the same tradition? Vadi includes a numerous amount of plays in his text that are identical to Fiore's, himself probably having access to the texts that Fiore wrote for Niccolo de Este III during his period of travel and teaching as a fencing master in the early parts of the 1400s. Vadi also has the same number of guards as Fiore does. This is likely due to the Italians' reverence for a cardinal group of numbers, which is 12. While Fiore has 12 guards, Vadi also has 12 guards as well, and most of them have almost identical names with small differences between them. Vadi also has cards that are almost identical to stuff that's in Dagumi Discounts as well. This kind of linking them in a nice string all together. My executive producer is back, this time with his other executive producer, the Hedgehog. So, what are the other things that we can kind of conclude as to why Fiore and Vadi are connected? Okay, so other than the 12 cards, and other than their names, and other than the plays, if we want to look at the principles and mechanics of both systems, we'll get into that now. If we are to draw comparisons between Vadi's system and Fiore's system, we will look at things that are similar first and then differentiate what is different. To start with our comparisons, we can look at, other than the plays and the guards being named similarly, and some of the later sections like the miscellaneous plays, dagger plays, and the spirit plays looking quite similar, we can see that things like the Cinghiaro, Reverso Falso Rota to Mandrino Fendente combo has almost stayed relatively the same. Also, the Scambiare de Punta and the Rompere de Punta have remained intact from Fiore's time to Vadi's time. These two are mechanics that show up regularly inside of Fiore's fencing and also can be said to remain in Vadi's fencing as well. Although, as we talked about in our last video, Vadi's thrusting can be a little bit ambiguous as to when and why we were supposed to do it. The follow-up plays from the Scambiare de Punta and the Rompere de Punta have remained relatively the same as well, with Vadi having a little bit more of an additional follow-up to the Rompere with a rising with a high rota to the arms, followed up to the head, which we'll see a little bit more of when I talk about specific plays from certain guards and against certain attacks later on in the series.
A couple of things that the masters have in common that are very important to recognize is the way that they enter into a fight. Both would prefer to threaten with the point, or at least there is a interpretation out there that the first master that is in Fiore's longsword is that the master is probing with a point online extended guard. This follows well with what we've experienced in our own ways of fencing, and it certainly is a very common way for people to fence. Vadi is much the same, telling us that we should always enter with our point in our opponent's face, threatening them. And both masters make good use of threatening with the point.
To compare Fiore's and Vadi's plays, we can see that while Fiore does show a lot better differentiation between the divisions of the sword with a punta, a mese, and a forte bind, or a weak, middle, and strong bind. Most of Fiore's plays are done at the mese spada bind, which is very similar to Vadi, where he focuses entirely on the mese spada bind. Some of the plays in Vadi's Stretto section are also almost identical to Fiore's, with the arm wraps, the disarms, and some of the descriptions of grabbing and bashing people in the face with their pommel, and the introductory chapter being one-to-one from some of Fiore's Stretto section. So, if there's any additional comparisons that you could draw, please be free and willing to throw those down in the comment section down below. I would like this to be more of a discussion than just me kind of talking at you, although I know that this is going to be a lot of that. Next, we'll talk a bit about the differences between Fiore and Vadi. So we've done all our comparisons, now we'll look at the differences. So, where Vadi shows a lot of gathered stances in his texts and in the depictions of his guards, Fiore is almost entirely squared. We also see a lot more extensive use of backweighting in terms of Fiore's longsword than Vadi's longsword. Although Vadi does show a lot of different backweights inside of his plays of the poleaxe and plays of the spear, along with some of his miscellaneous plays, longsword versus dagger or spear, if I recall correctly.
I think that Fiore extrapolates a lot more personally inside of his Largo section and inside of his Stretto section than Vadi, whereas Vadi is more focused on kind of, how do I say it? I think the best term I would say is to narrow down the fencer's options as much as possible into a focus on rotare, mezzotempo, or stretto. Fiore has a tendency to extrapolate more into different use cases for the high percentage techniques that he's found, and he's found works well most in his system, which is why you see a lot more focus on a wider variety of techniques than what Vadi has. Just a thought. For sure, I think that both masters have a well padded out system of how people are supposed to fence. But I think that the two most important aspects of Vadi's systems can easily be defined to the rotare principle and into mezzotempo, with feinting and direct attacks also being combined on there as well. Fiore, while he does have a very similar set of principles, they all revolve around the concepts of the masters, where at least from what my understanding and my interpretation of the text is that with Fiore, you're supposed to be attempting to either provoke a response from your opponent to arrive at one of the crossings that the masters have moved into, and depending on where you end up, you can play from the Largo plays or you can play from the Stretto plays. And if you yourself are on the offensive, then you attempt to attack, and depending on when you read the situation, you decide which kind of play you want to end up using, and then focus yourself while still remaining dynamic to work towards those those avenues of attacking while remaining in cover. Both masters do focus a lot on remaining in cover for sure, either by staying in the bind, which is both in Vadi, but also in Fiore, where most of Fiore, the entirety of Fiore's attacks are done from a cover. But I think that the important thing to reference is that while a cover might not necessarily be you staying in the bind with continual blade contact, that I think that Fiore works more extensively from destructive parries, where you make a strong beat and then follow through with your action. These things can be done in almost simultaneous manner, where your attack and defense is narrowly short. One could say a mesotempo action. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the differentiation of the systems. To boil it down, you can put it as this: Fiore, focus on destructive parries, attempting to align yourself into one of the three binds: weak, middle, and then strong, and then playing from those specific binds, whether it be through probing, whether it be through provoking, or whether it be through attacking. And then using whatever kind of situation you arrive at and whatever the kind of response you get from your opponent is, you select a play and then do that play. Whereas with Vadi, it goes a much similar direction, but is a lot more distinct, where you see what guard your opponent is in, you select a guard that is of the equal-sidedness and of equal footing in terms of the pairing of your legs. You approach, you observe the situation that is going on. You are either offensive, you are either provocative with a threat, a probe, very similar to Fiore, and then you can kind of streamline your actions down into either a use of rotare or a use of a mesotempo, or a rotare into a mesotempo, with the addition of destructive parries that have kind of, while been the mainstay of Fiore, been dropped down into a secondary set of actions, but Vadi does make mention of how useful they are as well. I just think that he's a little bit high on his own ideas, at least in terms of his focus on the rotating principle and mesotempo. You know, the masters do have their quirks, and they do have the specific things that they enjoy. But yeah, I think that's a pretty decent way to kind of differentiate the core mechanics of the two systems. Obviously, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, since everybody has their own take on what these two systems are trying to tell us, you know, hundreds of years now, looking into the past. And I would be a fool to say that I have the absolute right idea, and I would also be a fool to say that I could get all this shit all wrapped up into a fucking 30-minute video, but goddammit, I fucking tried. On another note, I know that there's probably a lot of things in here that I might have missed that you wanted me to speak about. As I said earlier, please be more than willing to just write things out in the comments. I'd love to just talk about this, because this stuff is all really fucking cool, and I bet there's some stuff that I know I haven't heard of, and stuff that you probably haven't heard of that we both know, that we'd be able to just have an interesting conversation about. So please, again, just feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to talk to me in the comments. As long as I have the free time. I've been busy as all fucking hell with work and everything else that's going on. But I always try to make time.
As I stated earlier, Vadi does focus more on the plays of the Mezisvada. He does not go into as exhaustive of detail as to how to perform grappling plays as Fiore does. In general, most of Vadi's advice is given in his introductory chapter as opposed to in his written plays, which Fiore is kind enough to show what we're supposed to be doing, and then give a nice little blurb at the top or the bottom of the plays that he depicts. Vadi kind of leaves it up to us to understand where we're supposed to be doing things spatially and in relation to binds in his introductory chapters, and then gives us most of the images of grappling that we are to be doing blade work
directly occupy the center than Vadi does. Fiore's posta lunga and posta breve both almost directly occupy the center line, whereas Vadi has a tendency to play more on sidedness. This does show up in Fiore as well, but it has much greater emphasis in Vadi's new spin on armazzare than Fiore's original take. One of my favorite distinctions that I forgot to mention earlier on was the amount of limb breaking that's just in Fiore. Yeah, you know, just like kicking people in the knees and like kicking people in the balls. While Vadi does have a lot of arm breaking and limb breaking plays in the stretto section of his text, Fiore just has them just like right inside of his longsword section, specifically in his plays in the largo or in the wide play. Which brings us to our last section on what is different between Fiore and Vadi, and that is that the way I view Vadi's material is that it is an evolution off of Fiore's work. Vadi does make mention of the ancestors and their art as opposed to his now, and he makes mention to science influencing his art, which is a very clear departure from what Fiore talks about in terms of his art. And I think that the best way to view Vadi is as kind of one of the last examples of the armazzare tradition, and a later master who was versed or at least studied in some part this greater scope and this greater tradition of himself, taking what was learned and applying it in his own way as a fencing master, and moving the rules from what he had known before and what was common throughout his tradition from before into his own vision. And that's where I would put Vadi. So we've answered almost all of our questions, except for why Vadi, and that specific question I am going to leave for another video, which will be our next one. So hopefully this wasn't too much of a fucking mess for you guys. This is probably one of the most challenging videos that I've made, and I've said that about a good couple of them now. But I promise you, at least in terms of research, in terms of trying to get my facts as straight as possible, I will say right now that there are probably going to be some mistakes, and if there are any, I will be sure to correct them either in the comments or with little blurbs on the video itself, just to give you guys a straightforward timeline. I'll be posting links to the sources that I use, because if there's one thing I've learned from going through school is fucking cite your sources. And thanks for watching. I really was happy to try to mash this all together so that folks that are just coming to the series to begin with kind of have a better idea of what hipster longsword is and what exactly we're going through. My name's ilnqA. This has been the Sinestro channel. Black Lives Matter, and I'll see you next time.